So good evening, and I must thank Anand for making me read on Opta and diabetic retinopathy and retinal vein occlusions. I thank my colleagues for having shared some of their data. So the clinical pathological changes that you would see, which are fairly common to both retinal vein occlusion and diabetic retinopathy, are retinal vascular tortuosity, which in the course of time may persist, normalize, or sclerose, microaneurysms, hemorrhages, edema, and hard exudates, perifoveal capillary engorgement, intraretinal microaneurysms, which are typical for diabetic retinopathy, collaterals, neovascularization, and of course, epiretinal membranes and retinal detachments. Now, where do you look for abnormalities in the opta for retinal vascular disorders? Basically, the retinal vasculature is confined to the nerve fiber layer and the ganglion cell layer, the inner plexiform layer, inner nuclear layer, and outer plexiform layer. So this is where you should be looking for abnormalities in retinal vascular disorders. All other layers are avascular. So we have the superficial vascular plexus that is confined to the nerve fiber layer, the inner plexiform layer. Then you have the intermediate capillary plexus, which straddles the inner nuclear layer. And you have the deep capillary plexus, which comes up to the outer plexiform layer. So these are the various slabs that one would look for. The intermediate capillary plexus is attained by manual segmentation and is available on certain machines like the Heidelberg. So what are the changes that you would see in vascular disorders? They could be qualitative or quantitative. As I mentioned earlier, they are localized to the superficial and deep vascular plexus, and these include non-perfusion areas, vascular tortuosity, collateral formation, abnormalities of the perifoveal capillary plexus as well as the peripheral capillary plexus, dilatation of the veins, microaneurysms, cystoid changes, non-perfused ghost vessels, and neovascularization. The quantitative changes are density of the vessels in the foveal and perifoveal area, measurement of non-perfusion areas, and measurement of the FAS. All these are purely investigational at the current moment in time. Now, how would Opta compare versus OCT versus FFA versus the clinical picture in these vascular disorders, typically for retinal vein occlusion? There is a good correlation with the clinical, anatomical, and fluorescein angiographic findings of capillary dropout, retinal atrophy, increased vessel caliber, shunt vessels, the presence of intraretinal edema, and neovascularization. Structures which are better visualized by OCT are irregularities of the FAS that are not obscured by leakage, and changes in the microvasculature that are located in the deep capillary plexus. Our ability to image the deep capillary plexus is one of the big advantages of OCTA versus fluorescein angiogram in these disorders. However, OCT is much better to quantify macular edema and assess response to treatment unless you use a reconstructed C scan. And of course, fluorescein angiogram is better to detect leakage, but you can work around this as I will show you as we go. This is a patient with a branch retinal vein occlusion. You see the hemorrhages, you see the cotton wool spots. The fluorescein angiogram shows leakage, and you see the structural OCT shows macular edema. But what does the OCT angiogram show you? This is the superficial capillary plexus of a patient with an infratemporal branch vein occlusion, shows large areas of non-perfusion indicative of ischemia. This is the structural scan which shows that there are some cystoid spaces which are parafoveal in nature, and this is corroborated on the structural OCT. So most of the time we need to compare the OCT angiogram along with the structural OCT. In this patient with a central retinal vein occlusion, you see that the perfusion is good, but the vessels are dilated and tortuous. The en-face image, the structural image, shows you that there is cystoid macular edema that is corroborated on the structural OCT. So this is just an idea of how we would compare the different investigations. Now, where do you look? Like I mentioned, we look at the superficial and the deep capillary plexus. And changes in retinal vein occlusions are more obvious in the deep capillary plexus than the superficial capillary plexus. In this patient, you see there are areas of ischemia in the superficial capillary plexus, but seem to be much more in the deep capillary plexus, which is very typical of these conditions. And very often we are stuck for the size of the image. Most machines have a 3 by 3 millimeter or a 6 by 6 millimeter, sometimes going to an 8 by 8 millimeter scan. But certain newer machines like the Plexelite do have a large image. This is a montage image on the Plexelite, the Swept-Sos OCT, showing the entire extent of non-perfusion in this patient. This is a 12 by 12 millimeter scan. Again, you see the changes are much more dramatic on the deep plexus. Now, machines like the Heidelberg are able to image the intermediate plexus, and sometimes you may see that the changes are more visible in the intermediate plexus than the superficial or the deep plexus. You see this picture? This is the superficial plexus, this is the deep plexus, this is the slab going through the intermediate plexus, and this is the avascular slab. So you see that the changes in the intermediate plexus are little more than changes in the deep plexus. How can you follow up with your OCTA? This is a patient with good visual acuity and ischemic retinal vein occlusion. This is the superficial plexus showing the ischemia. You see that he doesn't have any macular edema. His vision was 6/9. 2 months later, the vision is 6/9. Everything looks the same. But if you look carefully, you see that vascular changes have become more pronounced. These are very subtle changes that can be picked up on an opta, which may not be evident to you otherwise. And then this is another wide field image. This is a wide field photograph of a patient with a infranasal branch vein occlusion, and you see the opta nicely picking up the neovascularization with non-perfusion anterior to it. As I mentioned, sometimes the changes in the superficial plexus may be only limited to vascular dilation and tortuosity, and you may not see the cystoid macular edema on the opta. You compare it with the structural B scan, and on the right you see the unfast reconstructed image showing very well the cystoid macular edema. You can sometimes use this retina depth encoded image, which combines the superficial, the deep, and the avascular retina slabs with color code, showing that yes, there is a green area of opacity, which is seen here in the center, indicating that there is fluid or edema in the deep retinal plexus. Again, this is a patient with a non-ischemic central retinal vein occlusion. Changes are very subtle except for dilation and tortuosity of the vessels. You look at the deep vascular slab. If you look at the superficial vascular slab, you don't see much. But in the deep vascular slab, you see that there is some amount of edema. One more important finding that we found in patients with retinal vein occlusion and unexplained visual loss that cannot be attributed either to atrophy or edema is the presence of ischemia in the deep capillary plexus or the paracentral acute middle maculopathy. So if you do an opta in these patients, you see the superficial plexus looks all right, but if you see a dark area in the deep capillary plexus with some amount of ferning, this is very typical of paracentral acute middle maculopathy, which you need to suspect in an eye with retinal vein occlusion when you cannot explain the vision. Coming to diabetic retinopathy, these are the typical lesions, and I'll show you some interesting references that I found in the course of preparing for the talk today. Why do we not only mention that you cannot see microaneurysms in patients with diabetic retinopathy? Why don't you see them? This picture very elegantly describes why you cannot see them. These are the opta images. This is the fluorescein angiogram image. Because microaneurysms can be at different levels in the retina. Here you see there are microaneurysms which are visible in the deep plexus. Here you see microaneurysms which are visible even deeper. Some of them leak, some of them do not. And why do they not leak? They do not leak because the flow is too low to detect. Sometimes you can overlay the OCT image with your B-scan, and you see that areas which are red, indicating retinal thickening, show microaneurysms that leak. So this is a way you can identify leaking microaneurysms by overlaying the OCT image. And this also showed various patterns of microaneurysms on the Octa and found that saccular or fusiform aneurysms were more likely to leak. Again, this is a nice overlay of an Octa along with the superficial and deep plexus and the OCT, showing that this is actually the entire structure of the microaneurysm, this green one. In the center is a yellow spot. And this green is the area of fibrosis or hyalinization. And when you have microaneurysms that are hyalinized, they are not picked up well on Octa because of the very slow flowing. And this is a patient who had a localized edema, a diabetic macular edema. And you see in the deep plexus, you see the single microaneurysm, which is responsible for the edema. So this is a way you can ideally target the microaneurysm even for focal treatment. Another patient where you have changes in the superficial plexus, which are not very evident, changes in the deep plexus are more evident, and changes in the intermediate plexus are even more evident. And you see the cross-sectional scan in the intermediate plexus. It shows that the maximum amount of edema is in the intermediate capillary plexus. Another interesting article I came across was how would you classify neovascularization in diabetic retinopathy based on Octa? And they found that there was a very elegant article, and I think many people can go through this one. It shows that there were 3 types of neovascularization based on Octa. You can have a focal stalk that comes up through the retina and grows on the surface. We all would love to operate these cases. Then you have a single stalk which branches within the retina and then goes out in different directions, as you see here. Then you have type 3 neovascularization, which most of us would dread if we had to patient had to undergo surgery, where you see multiple stalks coming within the retinal surface, growing on the ILM, and then subsequently into the vitreous cavity, and this is what it looks like. And now what is IRMA, and can it be confused with neovascularization? We know that IRMA occurs within the retinal surface. This is a slide where you suspect an IRMA and you also wonder, is there a neovascularization? And if you follow these areas slowly, you will find that this part of the complex is intraretinal. Suddenly it breaks through the ILM, and then you have another structure on the top, which is actually the neovascularization. So you see this is IRMA converting into neovascularization. Those are a few interesting things that I found when looking at OCT features in diabetic retinopathy. Now, sometimes your patient may be very high risk for fluorescein angiogram, systemically not stable, and that's when OCT angiogram has a huge advantage. And these are pictures taken, the wide field images of a patient with poor systemic control, macular edema, subretinal fluid, and large areas of neovascularization in both eyes with capillary non-perfusion anteriorly. And how do you confirm it, that it's neovascularization and not IRMA? We don't always have histological features, but you can do the VR interface lab where you image above the surface of the retina, and you see that the neovascularization of the disc is very well seen in the vitreoretinal interface lab. What happens when you follow up a patient? This is a gentleman who had panretinal photocoagulation as well as anti-VEGF injections for high-risk PDR and CSME. And you see his neovascularization on the disc here. You have neovascularization here. And he just came for a review after 3 weeks. So out of academic interest, I repeated the OCT angiogram. And you see how the neovascularization has shrunk. and also the neovascularization elsewhere. So the OCTA can very nicely show you the regression of neovascularization. Well, clinically, it may not be very evident. This is even better seen on the vitreoretinal interface lab. You see the neovascularization of the disc very well pre-treatment. Post-treatment, this has shrunk. This is another use of the OCTA. Again, a patient with multiple systemic issues and diabetic macular edema. This is 2014 when she started treatment for diabetic macular edema. 4 years down the line, suddenly presented with a large subretinal hemorrhage. And we did an OCTA and found that she had a polypoidal CNV in the sub-RT space. And this was her after 1 month of injection. Now, what are the limitations and artifacts? Small scanning areas, unless you have wide field images, which are possible. Sometimes you can put in your 20D lens and get a wider field. Segmentation errors, which related to variations in macular anatomy, like tractional detachments and large macular edema. Inability to determine the presence of leakage, but then you're also able to see through the leakage and see if there's a vessel beneath it. The microaneurysms may not always be apparent on OCTA because they may have flow rates below the detection threshold and they may be at a different level. Capillary non-perfusion areas do not change with treatment, and this is seen even on fluorescein angiogram, so that is difficult to assess. And inability to visualize laser scars, so you cannot really tell whether your laser has been adequate or not unless you compare it with a clinical photograph. Image artifacts, yes, caused by patient motion, shadowing from retinal pathologies such as CME and vitreous hemorrhage, and limited ability to visualize blood movement out of the detectable flow limit. This is an interesting paper where they used ultra-wide field protocol to enhance the automated classification of severity of diabetic retinopathy. Looks very much like our ROP classification, 10 degrees, 10 to 30, 30 to 50, and 50 to 100, color-coded accordingly. And they found that, I'm missing a slide here, but with more severe the retinopathy, the purple areas in the periphery definitely extended further. And again, the earliest evidence of preclinical diabetic retinopathy was revealed using OCT perfused capillary density. And it was found that patients with preclinical diabetic retinopathy also had a slightly larger area of non-perfusion compared to normal patients. Photoreceptor damage in diabetic choroidopathy has also been noted. And you see areas of dark spots in the choriocapillaries. I'm sure Jay will talk about it in his talk. And finally, can you predict progression of diabetic retinopathy and development of diabetic macular edema? Yes, the FAS area, the vascular density, and the fractal dimension of the deep capillary plexus do predict diabetic retinal progression, but the vascular density of the superficial plexus could predict diabetic macular edema development. And of course, AI cannot be an automated diagnosis, cannot be far behind. And they have shown that automated diagnosis using clinical biomarkers, optical coherence tomography, and OCT angiography is reliable. These are our studies in Shankar Nethralaya. We have 3 which are in progress. Correlation between OCTA and multifocal ERG in diabetes with or without retinopathy. Association between contrast sensitivity and neuronal changes. We have one where we compared the foveal avascular zone in diabetic retinopathy, myopia, and normal fundus. Finally, one which did tell us that retinal perfusion indices can vary depending on the size of the cube that you use. This is my last slide. OCT and vascular disorders, where are we now? We're able to visualize the vascular, morphological, and distributional characteristics in different layers, more specifically the deep vascular plexus, which helps us understand the pathological processes, determine the activity, predictive value, and enable appropriate treatment and follow-up. We have newer modalities of classification of microaneurysms, neovascularization in PDR. And while the vessel density and foveal avascular zone are the most investigated quantified indices, they are usually still in the experimental stage and clinical application is still not ready. So thank you for your patient listening.